welcome to the first episode of Boy-A-Thon, a show where we take a look at every Game Boy game released in North America and Europe, eventually leading into the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance, and maybe even the DS. Every episode we'll be looking at 6 games, and this episode we'll look at all the games released in 1989. But before we can begin, let's talk about the Game Boy itself. Nintendo's entry into the handheld market was with their really successful LCD game series, the Game & Watch, with 43 million units sold, starting in 1980 and releasing the final game in 1991. Game & Watch creator Gunpei Yokoi needed to follow up Nintendo's handheld success, but if it was to be a success, it would have to have qualifications: durable yet light and small yet inexpensive. It also needed a good selection of quality games to choose from. Compare this to the first handheld system ever in 1979, the Milton Bradley Microvision, which was successful in its first year, but due to lack of game library and poor production quality, the Microvision was discontinued in 1981. So the Game Boy was released on April 28, 1989 in Japan, with 4 games at launch, with 21 more games over the course of the year from various publishers like Kemco, Square, and even Konami. Nintendo was very excited to release the Game Boy into the Western market, as 3 months later, on July 31st, Nintendo released the Game Boy in America with 5 launch titles. Let's take a look. The biggest game of the Game Boy's release was a brand new Mario game, this time on the go. Super Mario Land is like a mini port of the original Super Mario Bros., running and jumping across the land, collecting coins, eating mushrooms, jumping on enemies, and finding secrets and pipes. But I have this feeling that just porting the original Super Mario Bros. To the small screen would have not been as successful or have lasting appeal. Super Mario Land is the first Mario game not produced by Nintendo R&D 4, later to be named Nintendo EAD, and have no involvement by Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto. Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi was the director, and it's surprising because Super Mario Land is very excellent, which normally any game or any product in general without the original creator's outlook turns out really bad, as we'll see later this episode. As I was saying, I have a feeling Yokoi here added a special touch to this game to have it stand out, like how at the end of each level you have a chance to get more lives, or with its power-up, the flower. It doesn't shoot fire like Super Mario Bros., but a ball that bounces over the place that'll hit enemies and collect coins. Yeah, the Mario series is pretty weird, but this game turns the weird dial up to 11. Like the Koopa Troopas, if you stop on them, they go into their shells, but eventually they'll explode. Also, Mario's not in the Mushroom Kingdom anymore, but the Kingdom of Sarasaland, which borrows a lot of landscapes from real life. For example, this first level is based on Egypt, with other levels based on Atlantis, Eastern Island, and racist stereotyped China. Similar to its predecessor, Super Mario Bros., the first and third boss of the final level is a projectile shooting monster that has a switch behind them that you can hit to make the boss explode. Yeah, explode. After that, you meet the princess, Princess Daisy, who makes her first appearance in this game. But before you can get your kiss reward, it turns out to be an illusion by an enemy. The last level of level 2 is a shoot 'em up where Mario pilots a submarine shooting bricks and aquatic enemies. Honestly, this is a very shallow shoot 'em up, but it does add to this game's appeal and makes it stand out. Super Mario Land is actually interesting in a release perspective when compared to Super Mario Bros. 3. Mario 3 was released in Japan in 1988 and in the US in 1990. Super Mario Bros. 3 is such a fantastic game, and having it followed up by this might have been disappointing to Japanese audiences. But in America, this was the only other Mario game that played like the original Super Mario Bros., making it much more of a big deal here. Many will say Mario Land's flaw is that it's short and easy, but this was a launch title on a less powerful system, so I think that can be ignored. I think the worst thing is the flower power-up. It doesn't have the same physics as the fire flower. It is a ball after all, and it bounces all over the place, and you have to position yourself in the right position to kill the enemy. The final level has Mario in a shoot-'em-up again, this time in an airplane, shooting down flying chickens and dodging fists, where the final boss turns out to be a cloud shooting chickens. Nah, just kidding, but it turns out the final boss is a little more intimidating. The alien Tatanga, who's actually much easier than when I was a kid. Just don't stop shooting at him while dodging him and you'll beat him. Saving Princess Daisy for real and get a kiss. It should be noted that Peach didn't kiss Mario until next year's Super Mario World, meaning Daisy was the first princess to actually give Mario some. Super Mario Land is the best foot forward for the Game Boy as a sign that action games can exist on a small, watered-down portable console. Mr. Yokoi, hats off to you. It's Alleyway, Nintendo R&D 1 and Intelligent Systems Breakout clone. Mario pilots a cylinder spaceship and bounces a ball off of it to break blocks. Probably more familiar with the better-known Breakout clone, Taito's Arkanoid, which took the fun concept by adding power-ups, and now it's more common to say Arkanoid clone than Breakout clone. But Alleyway is certainly a Breakout clone, as there are no power-ups, which confuses me. Super Mario Land is still a full game despite being short. Could they not code power-ups? I guess to mix things up instead, there are levels where the blocks scroll, and levels where the ceiling caves in. And this bonus level featuring Mario. For 1989, this is an acceptable time waster, but nowadays there's no reason to play it. I think the most interesting thing about this is that the Microvision, the first handheld console, had a Breakout clone game for launch, much like this game. So make of that what you will. Continuing down the path of joint R&D 1 and Intelligent Systems launch titles, it's baseball. Now the Wikipedia article says that this is a Game Boy port of the NES game, which is absolutely wrong. But they do share some similarities, such as fielding being automatic and having to press B in the direction of which base you want to run to. Game Boy Baseball gives the choice of a US and Japan mode, probably for easy translation appeal. The only difference is that your players are named Igwa instead of Phil and uses the metric system. Game Boy Baseball is much better in the fielding aspect, where NES Baseball is a slow, dated mess. Despite that negative, NES Baseball is still enjoyable despite its age. Quite the impressive feat in 1983, The baseball game with animations like the pitcher shaking his head and the players at base preparing to run to the next base, proving that the Famicom/NES is quite the impressive new system. Game Boy Baseball, however, doesn't have those qualities, and it's quite bland compared to the NES game. I feel like that baseball didn't have much polish compared to Super Mario Land. That said, the game is still competent enough that I think in 1989 it would be a nice game to have if it didn't have Super Mario Land. But I think I can guarantee that baseball games will only get better from here. Another NES to Game Boy port, Tennis. Comparing this to the NES version, I'm not really a fan of the perspective of the court in the NES Tennis and how the CPU is a complete pushover, so I'm happy to say that the Game Boy version fixes both of those problems. The court now has an overhead view, which is much better, and the CPU is a lot tougher. A lot, in fact. This guy will kick your ass. Trust me from experience as a kid. The Game Boy port drops the double mode, which was just a lazy two-player mode, whereas Game Boy Tennis has an actual one-on-one multiplayer mode. So yeah, Game Boy Tennis is still fun almost 30 years later. I don't have much to say other than if you want to go back to a no-name tennis game on an old console, give it a go. Well, it's time for the big one. The very big one. The game that sold 35 million units, making it the best-selling game on the Game Boy. Tetris. From Russia with Fun. We all know and love Tetris, especially the Game Boy port, which pretty much launched Tetris into a household name. Now, the story of Tetris is a long, confusing story with legal and publishing rights dealing with the fact Tetris came from the communist government of the Soviet Union, and I don't feel like telling you all the details, so here's a basic story of the Game Boy port. But first, this version. Tetris for Famicom, made by a company called Bulletproof Software, who obtained the rights for the Japanese system. If you're familiar with the more modern controls of Tetris, then you'll absolutely hate this game. Down on the D-pad turns the Tetris piece and A drops the piece. Now, why am I talking about this version? Well, it was at the 1988 Consumers Electronics Show in Las Vegas that the head of Bulletproof Software, Hank Rogers, saw the game and met with Nintendo of America, who saw Tetris too and was very interested. It was Rogers who influenced the head of Nintendo of America, Minoru Arakawa, to package the game with the system instead of Super Mario Land, saying Super Mario Land would only appeal to boys, but Tetris would appeal to everyone. And so Nintendo, alongside Bulletproof Software, created the Game Boy Tetris version. Of course, you probably don't need me to explain the game. Pieces known as Tetris pieces fall from the ceiling, where you stack them into rows where they disappear. It was simple yet addicting and pretty much changed the genre of puzzle games. There's two modes of play, A mode, which is the basic game, and B mode, where you have to clear out a set number of lines with a bunch of junk blocks in your way. And that's all I really have to say on Game Boy Tetris. Considered by many the definitive port of the game, with even Alexei Pajitnov, Tetris' creator, saying it's his favorite. While it is a fine port, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, even compared to the Nintendo's NES port. Sure, it doesn't have multiplayer, but you know what it does have? A jam band of Nintendo characters playing Russian music, and even Mario dancing the can-can! Game Boy Tetris has something similar like that, but who are these nobodies? However, I will give respects to Game Boy Tetris for helping the Game Boy by being bundled with the system, which helped push units before the likes of Pokemon. And yes, Rogers, as it turned out, you were right all along. And that was the American Game Boy launch lineup. And despite some games that haven't aged well, the lineup was pretty solid. I can't say any game here is awful and could have been a good title to have with the system in 1989. So let's see the last game of 1989, or at least 5 months later. Well, we saved the worst for last, and that's pretty sad to say, considering this is Castlevania. If Super Mario Land got everything right about porting a console-based game to the handheld, Castlevania The Adventure pretty much got everything wrong. Or is it the Castlevania Adventure? Who cares? Also similar to Super Mario Land, none of the original team worked on this game. They were busy making the classic Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. And unfortunately, lightning did not strike twice this episode. You play as Christopher Belmont, an ancestor of Simon who is going to take out Dracula as expected. You whip and jump, of course, and take out candles to find items and power-ups like normal. But you'll notice that Christopher is quite slow, and it's annoying, but acceptable up until level 3, but we'll get to that. The graphics are actually quite impressive for an early Game Boy title, and the music is pretty awesome too. And that's sadly the best thing about this game. So where do we start? Let's talk about the power-ups. First, the most common ones are the coins, which give you points, because points are really important in this type of game, right? Next are the hearts, used for ammunition, right? And actually no, there are no secondary weapons to find, which some might see as a big deal, but I don't. I can get by with just the whip. But the hearts here are actually health this time. That probably sounds weird to someone who's never played a Castlevania game. Next we have the cross that makes you invisible for a little bit, and they're really only found near these never-ending rolling eyeballs. And finally, we have the biggest problem, and what kills the whole game for me, the whip power-up. Find it and your whip has a longer range and can hit twice as hard. Find another and you can shoot a fireball that's as strong as a basic whip attack. Now I know what a few of you might be thinking. This sounds very similar to Super Mario Bros. In fact, it's a little too similar, because if you get hit, you lose that power-up. In the console game, if a Belmont is hit with an upgraded whip, does he lose it? No. With the basic whip, this game is much harder to get through, because good luck not getting hit. I will say level 1 is the best level of the game, because it feels the most like classic Castlevania. But that classic feeling is lost as soon as you reach this spot, and we come to the biggest problem, number 2. Castlevania The Adventure thinks Castlevania is a platforming game. Castlevania does have platforming elements, but not that common. And Simon had much better jumping controls, as it's abhorrent in this game. It feels like you have to be at the very edge of the platform before you can jump, not helping that there are falling platforms, a bunch of blocks in a row that you have to jump perfectly over, and if you play this game for the first time, you will end up falling. Here's the first level boss, which is actually really easy with the powered up whip. Level 2 bombards you with the worst kind of enemies in the game. The ones that fly or bounce around the screen like these bats, and these fuckers that shoot balls out of their mouth and bounce all over the place. You hate the Medusa heads from the main series, well these are even more annoying. Nothing else too extraordinary about level 2 other than this bridge with eyeballs that explode if you hit them. And if you hit them on the bridge explodes with it. Why the bridge doesn't fall being not connected is anyone's guess, but I'm just nitpicking. The second level's boss, or bosses in this case, are a bunch of frogs that pop out of these holes and hop around. Does this just feel like a Castlevania boss? Much like the first boss, it's not that difficult if you have the fireball ability, and even without, it's still easy, just involves some dodging. Now we come to the worst level of the game, level 3, an advancing wall of doom level. Christopher's speed is not the kind of speed to have a character trying to outrun the screen. Look at this, some programmer put a candle here. Take time to hit it and you'll die. The first part of this level is pretty much cakewalk compared to the next part where you climb up the tower as spikes come up, especially with these ropes. You're even slower on the ropes, and if you want to jump across, you'll have to climb up the rope to jump to a lower section of the rope. And of course, because jumping is really precise in this game, dying will be very common this level, so expect to restart this level again, and again. And it gets worse when the level scrolls horizontally and you'll have to maneuver down this path that goes left, right, and left again. And here's the third boss, which is even easier than the first boss. Something's definitely not right here. This game feels closer to the Zelda CDI games than the Castlevania games, with its ropes and its bosses dying in no time.
You've killed me!
Good.
We've reached the last level, level 4. That's right, they left the game short as possible, but frustrating as possible. There's nothing new in terms of what you've seen except these awful spike parts that remind me a bit of Mega Man. But Mega Man is meant as a platform character, not Christopher, and these spikes that expand for you to platform on, that's all about trial and error, expect to die a few times. And before the room to Dracula, 2 creatures that are the exact same species of the first boss, which should be easy if you have the upgraded whip, but chances are you don't, and you'll have to attack one and avoid the long-range spikes. And I forgot to mention that enemies regenerate, so you might have to fight one again. If you can't already tell, Castlevania The Adventure is a stressful, unimpressive mess, and it really couldn't have been that bad. If it fixed the problem of A, losing the whip power-up, or B, getting rid of the focus on platforming, and you could have had a better game. Maybe not a good game, but at least a decent one. And the sad thing, according to the fans, this isn't even the worst Castlevania game. 1997's Castlevania Legends holds to that title. So I'm not looking forward to getting to that, but at least I have a while to wait. If you honestly want a concept of Castlevania The Adventure but done better, you should look at WiiWare's Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, which I heard was good, but I've never played. Of course, the final boss is Dracula. Instead of easy difficulty, however, Dracula here has obnoxious difficulty, positioning himself in hard-to-hit platforms while dodging his projectiles. Of course, it's not even his final form. If you're lucky enough to win, the castle, of course, crumbles to the ground and the credits play. But wait a minute, Dracula's still alive. But is this sudden twist worth a sequel? I guess we'll wait and see. But we'll save that for another time, and thank you for watching episode 1 of Game Boy-A-Thon. And tune in next time for the 6 first games of 1990. See you then.